What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Two Stripes Podcast, episode 49. My name is Colton Denning, and I'm your host, coming to you on Wednesday, February 28, 2018. Hope you all are having a good middle portion of your week as we truck on through the end of February and get into March, and spring practices and spring games are coming up here in about a month or a month and a half, so we're inching closer to the start of the 2018 college football season, and want to thank you for choosing to listen to today's show. Make sure to go to soundcloud.com/twostripespod. You can find the show there, and if you like the show, please be sure to subscribe. Search the Two Stripes Podcast on Apple Podcasts. You can find this episode and all the previous ones that I've done there. And the last show that I dropped was about the Cal Bears, and a lot of that episode was focused on offense and quarterback play, which is going to be a huge question mark for them, and that's kind of the theme for today's show, because we're going to be talking about the South Carolina Gamecocks with Chris Stanley of Garnet and Black Attack. And if you know anything about any Will Muschamp teams over the course of history, it's that you can probably count on the defense to be pretty good, create turnovers, flip field position, all of that good stuff you would want from a top-level SEC defense. But offensively, things tend to get a little vanilla and stagnant, and that was the case with South Carolina in 2017. They had, I think, the 88th ranked S&P plus offense. They were up and down. Quarterback Jake Bentley was up and down. But the good news is there's a lot of skill position talent. It's just a matter of whether Jake Bentley or anybody else, if things go wrong, can figure out how to get them the ball, and they can just make things work offensively. And you look right now in the SEC East, Florida, Tennessee, kind of starting over. We'll see what Dan Mullen and Jeremy Pruitt do. But South Carolina is kind of set up to, at least in 2018, be that second-place team like they were last year behind Georgia. But can they repeat it? Can they win close games? And can the offense take another step forward? That's what we talked about on today's episode. I thought it was very informative, and Chris dropped a lot of knowledge about what Will Muschamp is doing at South Carolina, his interesting recruiting strategy, and I know I learned a lot about South Carolina, so I think whether you're a South Carolina fan or not, there's a lot of interesting nuggets in this episode. So let's get right into it. Here is Chris Stanley of Garnet and Black Attack. I'm excited to be joined and talk some South Carolina football with the co-manager of Garnet and BlackAttack.com, and his name is Chris Stanley. Chris, thank you for joining the show, my friend.
Glad to be here, Colton.
All right, well, let's get into it, man. 2 years ago, South Carolina hired Will Muschamp to be their head coach, and I, along with many others, thought this was absolutely crazy. I made fun of it endlessly after the way his tenure in Florida ended, but 2 seasons into it, he's doing a pretty damn good job. He's 15-11. South Carolina's been bowling twice, and last year they go 9-4, finish second place in the SEC East, and go 5-3. How would you assess the job that Will Muschamp has done in Columbia so far?
Surprisingly well. You don't want to look at the receipts from my reaction when he was hired, because I was all in on Muschamp not being the coach. As a matter of fact, I still have to repay a bet where I said if Muschamp wins 9 games 2 years into his tenure, I will stand in the middle of the horseshoe, which is like the rotunda area at the University of South Carolina, with a megaphone and proclaim how wrong I was. So I still have to do that sometime in the near future. I certainly didn't think he was going to come in and win as soon as he did, because the talent when Spurrier left was about as bad as you can have for a Power 5 team. The recruiting really fell off a cliff after 2012, and it really all came out in that 2015 season when South Carolina went 3-9. There was it was a group of 5 defense that they were fielding. Did not have a starting 5 quarterback, or I should say a Power 5 quarterback out there, and you really only had one good skill position player in Pharaoh Cooper. I mean, they lost to the Citadel, for goodness sake. I didn't think that job, I don't know how many of your listeners know this, that loss was so bad to the Citadel that year that Tom Herman, who had agreed in principle to come be the South Carolina head coach, bailed because he did not want to get into this mess. So it really shouldn't be understated just how big of a problem talent was when Muschamp got here. And he has been able, with this staff, I should say, because it is a good staff, to get this team to play above their talent level, which is what they've done the past couple of years by creating turnovers, being efficient on offense, and not allowing big plays on defense. And while the games haven't been aesthetically pleasing, they've gone 7-6, 9-4, and have gone to bowls back-to-back years. So, needless to say, he has certainly exceeded my expectations.
You brought up recruiting, and I want to talk about that here in a second. But one of the things that has stuck out to me in the past 2 years, and specifically this past season with them going 9-4 and winning the Outback Bowl, beating Michigan, about Will Muschamp is, like you said, it's aesthetically, a lot of it has been similar to what we saw at Florida in terms of playing ugly games and winning with defense and an offense that kind of ball controls and you don't want to turn the ball over. But another thing that I've kind of noticed is it seems like he thrives a little bit more outside of the spotlight and outside of the pressure cooker that was the Florida job. And that's not to say that there isn't any pressure being South Carolina's head coach, given that it's an SEC job and a good SEC job at that. But it feels like him being out of the spotlight and his staff being out of the spotlight a little bit more has been something that's really benefited his style of coaching and something that has worked there.
Another thing at Florida, too, and I guess this does kind of play into the spotlight thing, the Florida job should be fail-proof. I mean, with the money that you have at that school, an athletic director or an athletic director then who will be willing to do whatever for the football program, you're the biggest school in a state that produces more NFL players, I believe I have this stat right, per capita than any other state in the country. There's just no way you can screw that job up. And Will Muschamp did. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He went, I think it was 8-5 his first year. He had the 11-2 2012, which I always saw was a little fluky because all of those games were, 17-14, 21-20, 10-3, that god-awful Georgia game that was like 12-9 or something like that.
They had the legendary game against South Carolina where they, 41-14, but they didn't get over like 80 yards of offense.
Oh, yes, because South Carolina turned the ball over like 5 times inside their own 30. But that's how Will Muschamp won games at Florida. And it wasn't sustainable because they never had an offense. And you saw the year after that in 2013 when all of the good defensive guys got hurt and the offense couldn't keep up, they went 4-8. And to be quite frank, this year, the 2017 South Carolina Gamecocks kind of looked like a poor man's 2012 Florida. But, that's getting away from your point. That, yeah, Will Muschamp has been able to kind of, if he was going to have scrutiny, it wouldn't come as harshly here at South Carolina because, I mean, as, the fans, and I'm a fan too, but I like to look at things with a clearer head than most. The football tradition here just isn't that rich. I mean, you going back into the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s. I mean, you're looking at one conference championship in all of that time. You've had, I think, 5 double-digit win seasons, and 3 of them happened less than 10 years ago. So the pressure here isn't that it doesn't steep up, and you're at a job where I think the fans are pretty patient considering that history. So all in all, when you look back at it, if Will Muschamp was going to take a job in 2016, South Carolina was a perfect fit all along.
Well, and if you want to succeed in that job, you need to be able to recruit, and that's something that Will Muschamp, especially lately, has done very well. You're taking a look at the 2018 recruiting class, which just wrapped up. We just passed signing day. By the 24/7 Sports Composite, South Carolina signed the 19th ranked class in 2018, 22 kids, 9 of those being 4 stars or better, and then 13 3-stars. And something interesting that I wanted to bring up and that I found very striking about South Carolina's recruiting class and the philosophy that Will Muschamp wants to use in recruiting in general was Bud Elliott, the director of recruiting for SB Nation, wrote a great article after signing day that referenced kind of their MO right now, in that they know that they can't compete player for player with Alabama, with Georgia, with LSU. They're not going to be able to send offers out to every blue chip 5-star, 4-star kid in the South and be able to recruit with those guys. What they can do is they can target, like in this class, 9 kids, 10 kids, build meaningful relationships with them, show them that they're important to the success of South Carolina, and they can develop them to get to the next level, and then recruit the usual, 10, 12, 3-star kids, develop those kids in sort of the mine for the lower level gems. And that's something that really stuck out. Is that sort of what you see as their MO right now?
Yes, and that's what your MO has to be here, especially with Clemson in the same state, who recently have been piling up 5 stars. People here are still kind of drawn to the 2009, 8, 10 classes where you were able to sign Jadeveon Clowney, Stephon Gilmore, Alshon Jeffrey, Melvin Ingram. I look back at that, and I think South Carolina really just caught lightning in a bottle, because you had a bunch of 4- and 5-star recruits in the South Carolina area, that being, Charlotte, Atlanta, the areas all in between that. And Clemson was going through a coaching change with Dabo Swinney and Tommy Bowden. So South Carolina was able to match up all of these really good recruits who just happened to be in the same area, and that produced the 11-win seasons 3 years in a row from 11 to 13. Now, when you can't capture lightning in a bottle, you do have to be a little more creative with how you go about getting kids, and Will Muschamp has been able to do that so far through these past 2 years. He's been able to go into Atlanta, which is, I don't even think it's arguable anymore. It's the most cutthroat recruiting area in the entire country. Every big school is there. I'm sure Ohio State gets down there too, to find these. There's just littered with 4- and 5-star guys. Will Muschamp has been able to go into Atlanta and dab a couple of these kids. Last year, they were able to go in and get a kid named Jamias Williams, who was a very highly rated 4-star corner who was going to go to Georgia but chose South Carolina on the last day at the last second. That was a big pickup. I mean, you look at this class right here, Kingsley Inagbre, I think I have his name right. Kingsley Inagbre, defensive end, 4 stars from Hateville Charter, very good program in Atlanta. 2 years ago, that was not a recruit South Carolina was getting on day one. Josh Vann, a wide receiver from Tucker. Dylan Wanham, his teammate from Tucker. J.C. Horn from Alpharetta, Georgia. These are all suburbs of Atlanta, and those are all 4-star kids. And, like I said, 3 years ago, South Carolina wasn't getting those guys, but Will Muschamp has gotten back to getting these fringe 4-star kids from the Atlanta area that you can build and develop, and when you get enough of them, you can really make something. You can turn yourself into an 8-9 win program consistently. And if you're South Carolina, you should be happy with that for right now.
So we're about a week away from the start of spring practice for South Carolina, and in your mind, what's the biggest story for them, either offensively or defensively, as we head into spring ball?
I'll get real football nerdy here. Defensively, you're looking at the secondary. They lost 3 guys out of the secondary last year: Jamarcus King, Stephen Montague, and Chris Lamons. DJ Smith, not Stephen Montague. He's coming back this year. DJ Smith. So you had 3 experienced senior defensive backs that are leaving off the pass defense that was ranked, I believe, in the top 40 in our colleague Bill Connolly's S&P Plus for pass defense. So those are going to be some big replacements. Jamias Williams, that guy I mentioned before, he should move into the starting corner slot. As far as those safety spots goes, I really think those are up for grabs. I think you could see a guy like Keeson Nixon, who's a junior college transfer, who came in last year, and fun fact for your listeners, played on Snoop Dogg's youth team growing up in Los Angeles. He had a couple of splash plays last year. I think he recovered a fumble for a touchdown, had an interception against Clemson. So the secondary is going to go through a lot of change. You lose in the linebacking core, you lose a guy named Sky Moore, who was probably the most productive linebacker, maybe defensive player in the history of the program. Had led the team in tackles all 4 years. I think he's only the 18th player in the history of college football to do that. Tied the school record for career interceptions, I think, with 15. He's just a super productive guy. Started all 4 years. He is going to be a huge hole to fill in the middle of the linebacking core. You only bring back 4 starters on that defense, and the defense is kind of what's made South Carolina go. And I shouldn't even say kind of. It is what's made South Carolina go the past 2 years when the offense hasn't been able to figure much of anything out. So that's definitely a concern. If you're a South Carolina fan, you really want to see who are these new faces that are filling in these spots, because the offense still hasn't quite proven that they know what to do week in and week out.
From my view, it feels like, if you're going to have, because on the returning production scale, South Carolina, as you mentioned, very low defensively on returning production, and offensively they bring back a lot, and we'll get into the offense here in a little bit. But given Muschamp's history, you would figure that if you're going to have an inexperienced unit, it might as well be the defense over the offense, because he can field a pretty solid unit. And you talked about Sky Moore. It's going to be crazy to watch them at middle linebacker this year, because it feels like he was there for about 8 years and was such an integral piece of that defense. So who's taking over that role, not only as that middle linebacker, but also as the leader of the defense?
As far as the leader is concerned, I think that's an easy question. DJ Wanham, he was a sophomore at defensive end last year. He had a good freshman season, really kind of broke out this year. He had 13 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, really was a good presence on the defensive line, had some really big plays this year. I remember one specifically against Tennessee when they were driving to try and win. It was a pressure to get the quarterback, I think Guantano, to throw off balance that wound up being the game-deciding play. So Wanham, I would look at as your new defensive leader for South Carolina. I think he's going to have a great junior year. Now, as far as a linebacker to fill in, Bryson Allen Williams was injured early on last season, and he will be back this year after getting a medical red shirt. He is a rangy 6 foot, 230-pound guy, plays off the edge, will probably rush the passer a lot. I expect him to help with some of that production, but as far as having that quarterback presence in the middle, your guess is as good as mine. If South Carolina fans are listening to this, a name I would look for is a freshman who's coming in this year named Rosendo Lewis from Deerfield Beach, Florida. He was a Florida State commit up until Jimbo Fisher left, and then he went up for grabs. 4-star kid, 6'1", 225 pounds. I think he could get some early playing time if things shake out well for him come fall.
And you talked about defensive backs earlier, and this has long been a theory I've had for the past couple of years. If you're going to be inexperienced in an area in the SEC East on defense, it might as well be in that defensive backfield, because some of the passing games outside of really Missouri and that portion of the conference, you're going to have some time to build, because even with Florida, they're going to be breaking in a new quarterback. Vanderbilt's passing game is Vanderbilt's passing game. Tennessee's had some struggles, same with Kentucky, and even Georgia, for as good as their running game was last year. You're still waiting to see if that offense can take another step forward into being a dynamic passing offense. So it'll be interesting to see how South Carolina's defensive backs and that back seven really grow in terms of the passing game. But flipping over to the offense, there's a lot going on. Brian McClendon comes in as the new offensive coordinator. Dan Warner, former Ole Miss coach, who got a ton of praise for his work there, he comes in as quarterback coach. This offense ranked 88th in S&P Plus last year. What do they need to do to take that next step? Not to be one of the best offenses in the country, but to be a top 50 offense and just be able to help out their defense and play the type of football that Will Muschamp wants to play.
By the way, going back to your previous point, you could have just said the SEC East is terrible. That's all you could have said.
It's a little rough.
I'm here for it. I'm not going to be the guy that pushes back on that. South Carolina doesn't go 9-4 last year without the SEC East having a horrifically down year. But going back to what you were just talking about with the offense, this all begins and ends with Jake Bentley, the quarterback. Which, by the way, did you know he was in high school 2 years ago?
I had heard on some previous readings back when he first signed.
If you watch a South Carolina game and you want to make a drinking game out of it, that is an automatic chug, because somebody will bring that up, that he was supposed to be in high school 2 years ago. Anywho, he was supposed to be redshirted last year. They stripped it off at the Massachusetts game against UMass, and he just started lighting it up. I mean, for the first couple games, he beats Tennessee in an upset, has a couple of big games, had a really big statistical game against South Florida, and the hype grew really a little too high around him now that we all look back on it. And this season, he didn't seem to make any sort of real progression or step ahead. He still looked like a freshman out there trying to play quarterback against the rest of the SEC East. And he had a lot of really weird, questionable throws and mistakes. Against Florida particularly, he had some really bad interceptions. He's a little perplexing. I don't know I don't know if moving McClendon to offensive coordinator helps, because I don't know what his chops are. He's a great receivers coach. I mean, when you look at the receivers who have come out of South Carolina, whether it be Deebo Samuel, Brian Edwards, or Trey Smith, Shee Smith last year, the receivers certainly develop well, and he's a hell of a recruiter. The problem is I don't know if he can call plays, and I don't know if he can develop quarterbacks. So that all remains to be seen. I don't know if McClendon moving helps. Perhaps moving Roper out helps. Maybe Roper's presence was holding him back. But there's going to be a lot of question marks around Jake Bentley this year, because he's got the skill talent. He's got 4 receivers that can go up and get the ball, especially one in Deebo Samuel, who's going to be coming back this year, who is a touchdown waiting to happen every time he touches the ball. He's got 3 running backs who are experienced. His offensive line is going to be looking somewhat patchwork this year after losing a couple of good bodies, but they've been recruiting well in that area, so I don't expect there to be too much of a drop-off. But my bold prediction for this year is that if Bentley doesn't get his stuff together, as in, like, if through the first 4 games he's still looking like a freshman, we may see a little bit of Decarrion Joyner, who was the 4-star dual-threat quarterback out of Charleston, who was an Elite 11, I think, finalist, and was the number 9 quarterback in the country this year. We could see him get some early playing time because of his dual threat abilities. I don't know what the likelihood of that is to happening. That's why it's a bold prediction. But this is all circling around Jake Bentley. If he can't make a significant step forward in 2018, I don't know what his playing time is going to look like.
Basically, all the skill position talent is back. You look at the running backs, A.J. Turner, Tyson Williams, Rico Dowdle, Mondenson back even. And then at wide receiver, you have a guy in Brian Edwards who had, I couldn't believe this, 101 targets last year and 64 catches. He's back, even though the tight end Hayden Hurst leaves. There's still Trey Smith, Shee Smith, as you said. And then the guy that I really wanted to talk about on this podcast, I'm just happy as hell that he's back playing college football and is healthy. And you mentioned earlier Deebo Samuel, who, like, if you guys haven't watched Deebo Samuel, he's not just an explosive player. He might be the most dynamic player in the country, let alone the SEC, when he is healthy, and only played in 3 games last season, had 2 kickoff returns for touchdown. He's, like you said, a big play waiting to happen, a touchdown waiting to happen. I don't even have any real analysis on him other than just, like, I'm stoked as hell that Deebo Samuel is back playing football.
Oh, you're just echoing the sentiments of Gamecock Nation, baby, because the first 2 games of last season, I don't think it's that much of an exaggeration to say that Deebo Samuel won the North Carolina State game by himself, because with the kickoff return to open the game, he had 2 huge touchdown catches. Without him, South Carolina doesn't win that game. It's simple, closed door, shut. There isn't an argument for it. And you can even make an argument with the Missouri game. I think the final on that one was like 33-16. But Deebo Samuel had 2 huge plays to start that game when South Carolina was sputtering. And without those 2 plays, I don't think South Carolina gets the momentum boost to go through and win that. He had a big play to start out the Kentucky game, and then he got hurt. And I'm fully convinced that him getting hurt in that Kentucky game totally killed any forward momentum South Carolina had, and that's why they lost. With him coming back into the fold, along with Edwards, who will be developed more this year, and then, the silver lining to Deebo being out last year was that Trey and Shee Smith got a lot of playing time. And the 2 of them developed into really nice college receivers, and I expect them to have good years again as sophomores. So the 3 of them combined with Deebo I don't see there to be an excuse why Jake Bentley can't be successful, because he's got 4 legitimate targets, including one that I think is a surefire top 3 round draft pick.
Who are 2 players, one on offense and one on defense for South Carolina, that are under the radar right now, but by the end of the 2018 season, we'll be saying those guys were the key to South Carolina's success?
On defense, let me go with I'll go with Jemias Williams. I know I've already said his name a couple of times this year. He had kind of a rocky freshman season. I mean, he, as highly touted as he was coming out of high school, he had a couple of big plays early on in the year, but I could have, for every big play he made, I would give you another 2 that he gave up something big. That's because he was a gambler. He's one of these cornerbacks that'll sell out for a turnover or a big play, but if he doesn't hit it, it winds up being a 20-yard reception on the other side. Now, I fully expect, for how talented he is, to go to DB school with Will Muschamp over this spring and come out on the other side as a legitimately great corner in this defense. And I really think he's going to have a breakout sophomore year, and I think he'll be a household name amongst college football nerds like you and I by the end of the season. Now, as far as offense is concerned, I wish I could say it would be Jake Bentley, but he's got too much, I think, clout with fans as far as a name goes. So let me give you another name, and that is going to be Casey Crosby. Now, Crosby got hurt very early last year. He got a medical red shirt, and he'll be back as a redshirt junior. Crosby was a very highly recruited tight end. He's 6'1", 242, so he's not the ideal frame. He's more like an H-back type. Think Delaney Walker in the NFL, if you want to make it tough. He would play out in the slot last season, and he would play in the H-back spot. He'd play a little fullback. He's a really fun player, and he's very athletic for his position. He can create a lot of mismatches in the passing game. And with him back in the fold, I don't think, and I don't want to disparage Hayden Hurst, because he was superb as a tight end. But I think with Casey Crosby, being paired up with that foursome I talked about earlier at the receiving corps, I think the transition is going to be seamless from August to Crosby. And I think Crosby will have a lot of big catches this year for Jake Bentley in the Gamecocks.
All right, so as we wrap this up here, earlier on, you and I buried the SEC East, and that should probably be a good thing for South Carolina in 2018, because from my perspective, it feels like 2018 in the SEC East is Georgia, a huge gap, and then everybody else. And when you look at everybody else, Florida, that's always the team that has the talent, but right now, new coach, Dan Mullen, they're going to have a new quarterback. They're going to be building. Tennessee, kind of the same situation, even though they're coming off an even worse year where they didn't win a conference game. They're going to be in their first year under Jeremy Pruitt. And then you look at everybody else. Vanderbilt's kind of nestled themselves in this 5-7, 6-6, 7-6 if they're lucky under Derek Mason situation, which is the same for Kentucky under Stoops. And then Missouri, they can score, but can they stop anybody from scoring? And to me, it feels like South Carolina right now, even with those questions offensively, feels like has the best opportunity to kind of be that second team behind Georgia.
I would agree with that. I'll just run through team by team real quick. I have no idea what to expect for in Tennessee. Just no clue at all, because Butch Jones was able to recruit at Tennessee. Like that, I think that's something that doesn't get mentioned very much, because we all like to pile on Butch because he's goofy. He recruited very well at Tennessee. He's got talent there. I have no idea what to expect from Pruitt as a head coach. Now, moving on to Florida, if Dan Mullen goes down there and wins 9 or 10 games his first year, like, that wouldn't shock me at all. Like, I am way, way, way high on Dan Mullen as a head coach. I think he is excellent. I don't think people around the country understand just how hard it is to win at Mississippi State. I mean, for Big Ten fans, that's like winning 8 to 9 games a year with Illinois.
That's like winning at Purdue.
Yeah, it's like winning at Purdue. It's like what Jeff Brom's doing over there right now. It's incredibly hard to win at Mississippi State. And Dan Mullen has done it consistently now for almost 10 years. And I can tell you right now, as a child of the SEC, growing up, Mississippi State was your doormat. That was the guaranteed win you would have on your schedule every year. And if you give him the kind of resources and talent you'll have at Florida, I think he'll have the Gators back and running very quickly. So I'm high on that. I think Vanderbilt has somewhat hit a ceiling with Derek Mason. I don't know. They have yet to prove that they can get a good offense over there. And I don't know if they can be any better than 6-6, 7-5. The same thing with Kentucky. The Stips Kentucky teams are so weird because they will play some really good football. I mean, they were 7-6 this year, just to give you an idea, and they'll play Georgia really tough, or they'll play Florida really tough, and Florida's in a good year, and then they'll turn around and struggle with Eastern Kentucky, or struggle with Eastern Michigan. They're so up and down and unpredictable. I can't. There's no way to give an accurate prognosis on them. Missouri's interesting now because Missouri, through the first 6 games of last season, looked like one of the worst teams in all of football. But in those last 6 games, they looked incredibly formidable. And South Carolina was fortunate to get them in the front half of the season. Coming into this year, I think Missouri is a light sleeper team. Not to necessarily win the SEC East, but at least to make a little bit of noise potentially. I think Missouri's on to something there. And then, Georgia's Georgia. I mean, after their signing day and what they were able to do this season, I don't foresee them slowing down anytime soon. So I think you're spot on with that analysis. I think Florida, even though they've been dormant the past 6 or 7 years, may finally have their awakening with Mullen, and may even find a way to challenge Georgia 3 years from now if they get the recruiting back to where it needs to be. Missouri could be interesting, but Will Muschamp can carve his way somewhere between 2 and 4 in the East every year if they keep pace with what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on Mullen. I think long term he's going to build something that can rival what Georgia's doing right now. For me, it's just that first season without a true idea, at least right now, what they're going to do at quarterback. Is it Emory Jones? Is it Felipe Franks? Is it somebody else to kind of be a stopgap until Jones is that guy you would at least think going forward? And then, it's not even like Jim McElwain left him what Will Muschamp did because the cupboard was much more stocked
Agreed. Totally
when McElwain came in, which is crazy to think about. So I'm with you that long term, Mullen's definitely going to be the guy to bring them back and compete with Georgia. I'm just very interested to see first year, though.
My argument for the quarterbacks with Dan Mullen would be go look at who Dan Mullen's quarterbacks were before Dak Prescott.
Chris Ralph, that's my guy.
Yeah, Chris Ralph was taking Mississippi State to 7 and 8 wins a year. So when people are like, well, I don't know who the quarterback at Florida is going to be, trust me, Dan Mullen's worked with a heck of a lot worse than what he's got at Florida right now. I wouldn't be super concerned about that.
All right, so last question. Do you think, at the very least, going to a bowl game is a fair expectation, and what should be the expectation of South Carolina this season?
Oh, absolutely. A bowl game and the top 4 finish in the East, I think, is what you should be looking at. And I will say this, and this is not a popular opinion amongst South Carolina fans. South Carolina has gotten away with a lot of close wins these past 2 years. I'll just read them off to you right here. NC State was a 7-point win. Louisiana Tech, 1-point win. Tennessee, 7-point win. Vanderbilt, 7-point win. Florida, 8-point win. Michigan, 7-point win. And that's 6 alone right there. And then you look at the losses, A&M by 7. That's 6-1 in one-possession games. That's pretty remarkable just from a luck standpoint. Now, I'm not saying South Carolina lucked their way into 9-4, but you don't go 6-1 in one-possession games by happenstance. That's something, fans should really be taking into consideration, because when I saw South Carolina play this year, I saw a 7-win talent team that played above their heads to win 9 games, and I considered the same thing last year. That was like a 4 or 5-win team that found their way to 6 games, 6 wins. So is that sustainable? That's all I want to ask Gamecock fans. Is that sustainable? I don't know if it is. Because if you're following Will Muschamp's path from Florida, he was okay his first year. He had a really good second year, and then he bombed out in his third year and then couldn't recover in year 4. So this is the money year for Muschamp. Can he prove that this model is sustainable, unlike it was at Florida? Because if he can do that again in year 3 here at South Carolina, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable as a fan that what he's doing here is going to last long term.
And just at a cursory glance at the 2016 season, it looks like they were 4-2. So you couple that with what happened last year, and as you referenced Bill C's numbers earlier, you can have a couple of seasons where that works, but eventually the numbers balance out. So it will be interesting to see how it shakes out, because at the very least, you would expect that South Carolina, with that style that Muschamp likes to play, unless the offense just takes such a dramatic step forward, that they are going to be in close games, and it'll be very interesting to see how they do in them this year.
Totally agree, my man. Totally agree.
If you want to catch up with anything happening in South Carolina football and with everything going on with Will Muschamp's third season in Columbia, which spring football, like we said, it starts in a week from when we are recording this right now, so it's just right around the corner. Be sure to visit garnetandblackattack.com. Also follow them on Twitter at GABattack. You can do that there. And then, Chris, where can they find you on Twitter?
Oh, they can find me at the Texas Stanley.
Make sure to follow Chris on Twitter. Follow Garnet and Black Attack on Twitter. Visit their website. Have a lot of fun discourse with their fans, South Carolina fans. The ones that I've met, and there's not a lot in Colorado, but the ones I've met are very nice, and I know that I'm excited to watch how their season plays out this year in the SEC East. One of my best friends is a Florida fan, so I really enjoyed watching Will Muschamp beat them this past year. So excited to see if they can.
Oh, it makes them so mad.
I'm excited to see if they can do it again. But Chris, man, thanks for joining the show. I had a lot of fun, a lot more fun talking about Will Muschamp than I thought I would.
Hey, I appreciate it, Colton. Best of luck with the podcast, man. I really enjoyed it, and keep doing what y'all are doing at Land Grant.
It really makes me happy how often Chris Relf's name gets brought up on this podcast. I may have to schedule an interview with him and just talk about his days at Mississippi State. But shout out to Chris Stanley for joining the show, talking about South Carolina and their 2018 season and some of the expectations and what Will Muschamp is doing in Columbia. Once again, go to garnetandblackattack.com. Follow them on Twitter at GABattack, and follow Chris on Twitter at the Texas Stanley. If you want to find the Two Stripes podcast, you can go to soundcloud.com/twostripespod. Subscribe to the show. Search Two Stripes podcast on Apple Podcasts. Find this episode, all the previous episodes there. I always mention it in these off-season ones, but they're pretty evergreen. There's no real breaking news right now, so you want to go back and listen to the Cal episode or Purdue, or stick in the SEC East and listen to my conversation with Adam Silverstein of OnlyGators.com about Florida. I would encourage you to do that if you enjoyed today's episode. Find those shows there, and if you want to interact with me on Twitter or leave me some feedback there, you can follow me, send me a tweet at Dubsco, DUBSCO. That wraps up today's episode, but I will be back next week with another show talking about Minnesota football. That's a program that definitely goes under the radar, and I spoke the other day with Andy York of thedailygopher.com about all things Gophers, and PJ Fleck, who is a guy, if you follow college football at all, generates a lot of attention from people with just his personality. So we delved into a lot about PJ Fleck's recruiting strategy in Minnesota and what he's doing to build that program up. So I hope you guys stick around for that, because it was a lot of fun to record, and I think you will enjoy it. But until then, hope you all have a great rest of your week and weekend. Thank you for listening to the show, and I will talk to you next week right here on the Two Stripes podcast.